Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for Women in Faith, Diverse Voices Speak panel discussion. I am Renee Battle-Brooks, Executive Director of the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. We are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. We are so excited tonight to bring to you, in partnership with our awesome library partners, Prince George's County Memorial Library System, a discussion about interfaith, faith, gender, and community. And we are forever reminded that, we have more in common than we have diverse. And so we want to come together to talk, to learn, to understand. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator this evening, Jenna Lutka. She has been an interfaith leader in the Washington, D.C. area for almost 15 years. Jenna previously served as the Director of Interfaith and Intercultural Affairs at the Rumi Forum in Washington, D.C., where she led groups of religious, academic, cultural, and community leaders on intercultural and interreligious study tours. And she has spoken on interfaith relations at universities around the country. Ms. Lutka has been invited to participate in numerous community outreach and working group meetings with federal agencies, including the Department of State and the White House. Specifically, she talks on issues or teaches on issues of religious freedom, human rights, and justice. She is a Muslim Leadership Initiative Fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and she sits on the steering and planning committees of several interreligious dialogue groups in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Jenna currently leads and gathers a group of Muslim women in the DMV on discussions of spiritual and personal growth and community organizing. So Jenna, we thank you so much for being with us this evening, and we look forward to a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renee. And thanks to the HRC and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System for hosting this important panel discussion. We are going to have each panelist present for about 10 minutes this evening on how they see and experience the intersection of faith, gender, and community. Afterwards, we are going to have a question and answer period. So we invite all of you joining us this evening to share any thoughts and questions you have in the chat, and we will try to get to those questions as the event progresses. Thank you all for joining us this evening in what promises to be an interesting and wide-ranging discussion. Now, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Kieran Gill. Ms. Gill is the Executive Director of SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. She has also served as President and CEO of PARS Environmental, a full-service environmental consulting firm. And prior to becoming Executive Director at SALDEF, she volunteered with the agency, playing a critical role in the expansion of SALDEF's law enforcement partnership program and in the expansion of the Sikh-led internship in New Jersey. Thanks so much, Ms. Gill. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and I'm so excited and honored to be here with this illustrious panel for an extremely important discussion and extremely important topic. As Jenna mentioned, I'm Kieran Gill. I'm Executive Director of SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And I thought I would start off with, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Sikhism, just a very short overview of the Sikh religion to give some context. So Sikhism was founded a little over 500 years ago by a man named Guru Nanak in South Asia, in the Punjab region of South Asia. There are about 27 million Sikhs worldwide, about 500,000 which reside here in the US. And it's actually the 5th largest religion in the world, although not known to as many people in the West. The majority of Sikhs do reside in India, but there's a number of Sikhs in the diaspora, including the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. I'm sure I'm missing other countries as well. The fundamental philosophy of Sikhism, I think, can be summarized by the first word in our scripture, Ik Onkar. It's one God. But one God means more than just one God in the sky. It means oneness. And that is the essence of our religion, oneness. God is in everyone and everything. And intertwined with this idea of oneness is this idea of equality. So the gurus, there was actually 10 gurus, 9 that followed Guru Nanak, spoke out during that time against a number of social injustices of the day. During that time, the caste system was very prevalent in India. The caste system is a system, a hierarchy, which determines, depending on what caste you are, it determines what you can do with your life, what opportunities you have, the level of respect and dignity you are afforded in society. And the gurus spoke out against the system, saying that everyone is equal, everyone can achieve enlightenment, and it doesn't matter what caste you are. In fact, this was emphasized so much that the 10th guru actually told Sikhs to take the last name either Singh for male or Kaur for female. Singh means lion, Kaur means princess, so that the last names, which typically denote caste, would not be part of people's identity. It would be, your spiritual path would be part of your identity instead of your caste. When it came to gender equality, similarly, the gurus spoke out against a number of unjust practices of the day. Sati, for example, was a practice that was commonplace during that time, where if a woman's husband died, they would in turn throw themselves into the fire and kill themselves because there's no, it was believed that life was not worth living without the husband. But again, this idea that each person has an autonomous relationship and can have an autonomous relationship with God, with oneness, and have that connection and has that within them is important. And therefore, life is worth living, even if other members or another spouse in the relationship is gone. So there's a number of examples that I can give throughout Sikh history and in the Guru's philosophy and the Sikh philosophy that really show the importance the Gurus placed on gender equality. So I just want to start off with that as a baseline. I think what's interesting about this conversation, we talk about a lot of times philosophy of religion, and then we get into practice of religion. And interestingly enough, here in the West and in South Asia, we are living in patriarchal society. So we have our philosophy on one hand, and then we have our cultural norms on the other. And there are definitely times where cultural norms do influence the practice of the religion and the way people think about religion. So, for example, in Sikhism, men and women can conduct equally any religious ceremonies, and you often see that, in religious spaces. But you also see, I've also seen, for example, there's spaces where in Gurdwara or temple management where women's voices are not as heard as often, and they are not in leadership positions as commonly as you would expect for a religion that really emphasizes gender equality and equality for all. So I think, again, the practice and the philosophy, sometimes there's gaps. And we can see both in the Western context, we still have a ways to go, I think, with gender equality between the wage gap, between, we've seen what's going on with the Me Too movement. In the South Asian culture, you also see it's heavily patriarchal. You see that, a lot of power and influence is held by men. So I think that there are gaps in the philosophy and the practice. I think certainly there is a lot of progress because the philosophy is a very progressive philosophy. So we do see Sikh women in leadership positions, but I would personally like to see more. And my personal experience with, being part of the Sikh faith and being in a number of religious spaces, both domestically and abroad, there are many spaces where I feel extremely empowered being a Sikh woman, from a tradition of a very progressive philosophy and a tradition that emphasizes equality. But there's also spaces where I've noticed as a woman, my voice is not heard as frequently or as willingly. And that there are spaces where I feel myself and other women are overlooked. So I do think that there is work to do across the board. And I think specifically because we live in patriarchal societies, in both contexts here in the West and here in South Asian context, that I think it's extremely important in our religious spaces to make sure that our young women and girls are being told that they have value, that we build up their self-esteem, that we tell them that their voice matters, and that we teach young women and girls the philosophy, and then we follow through on that philosophy with action. I think that's extremely important, and I certainly try and will continue to be part of that effort. And I know so many other Sikh women are doing amazing work in this area as well. So I guess those are my opening comments. I'll turn it back to you, Jenna.
Hi, thanks so much, Kieran. All right, next we will hear from Rahma Abdul Alim, the Executive Director of Karama, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. There, she works to create a global network of advocates knowledgeable about the gender equitable principles of Islam, able to advance the cause of Muslim women's rights in legal and social environments. As Karama's executive director, she works with scholars to empower advocates about the rights Islamic law grants to women and to educate Muslim women in Islamic jurisprudence, leadership, and conflict resolution so that they may become the leading agents of change within their communities. Attorney Abdul Alim graduated from Duke University with a double major in religion and sociology and obtained her JD from the University of Michigan Law School. Attorney Abdul Alim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rahma Abdul Alim, and I'm the Executive Director of Karama, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. I'm often asked when I first start speaking, are you really a lawyer? And you're going to know I'm really a lawyer because the other speakers may not feel the need to do this, but as a lawyer, I do feel the need to give you a disclaimer that all the opinions I give tonight are my own and may not express the views of the entire American Muslim community. I was born to two people who had converted to Islam before my birth, but I'm African American. And constantly people would ask, where are your people from? When did your parents come here? And I would constantly say, my family's been here. We've been here for generations. We are not immigrants. I'm African American. But my entire childhood, my father was an imam, which is a religious leader. And so he would constantly tell me, Rahma, you're on a mission. And I would say, what are you talking about? Why do you keep on talking about this mission? I honestly thought he had watched too much Star Wars and Star Trek, and the mission, wording was getting old. But every time I did something positive towards my education or towards my job, oh, you're on the mission. This is exactly the mission that I thought you were going to be on your entire life. You're on this mission. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? Got into college, you're on this mission. I'm like, okay, I'm going to college, went to law school. You're on this mission. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. When I decided after college, because at Michigan, I was very cold. I thought it was the coldest place on earth. So I moved to Georgia and started working at a major law firm down there. And so he wasn't as excited. He was like, yes, it's kind of part of your mission. After a few years, when I started volunteering on the board of the Muslim school down in Atlanta, oh, he was like, oh, this is part of the mission. I can see the mission. And so I'm thinking, what is he talking about? And so for years, he was very excited that I was on the board of this Muslim school. At the same time, I was really at a Fortune 100 law firm. And he was like, yeah, this is not quite what I want you to do. And I was getting burnt out at the law firm and I wanted to do something different. And so I moved up to the DC area and I had the opportunity to go to Karama's Law and Leadership Summer Program. And that program was transformative to me. And I was actually shocked. I did not think that it was going to have that big an effect on me because I was a religion major. Like I knew all of this like religious stuff, like my father's an imam. That's what we did over dinner. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to learn anything. But it was transformative because it opened my eyes to so many issues that I had never thought of before. So a few months after the program, they came to me and said, would you be interested in being our executive director? And I was like, that can be something different. And so I asked my father, I was like, what do you think? Give me your thoughts on it. He was like, this is the mission. This is the mission. I'm so excited. I'm thinking, why is he so excited about me taking a huge pay cut to go into the nonprofit sector? He was like, this is the mission. This is what I've been planning for you for your entire life. And I'm thinking, you never mentioned this before. You never said that this was what you wanted me to do. He was like, no, I needed you to talk about, what was important to you. And so I said, okay. I still didn't really know. I had been working at Karama for a couple of months. And then we had the opportunity to go to the Philippines and do a law and leadership summit there for some Muslim women from Mindanao. And while I was there, I realized, wow, this is the mission. This is what I've been working towards for all these years. And I was like, but why did I not really think of this before? So I had to start thinking, why Karama when I had gotten other job opportunities to do other things before and wasn't interested in what pulled me towards Karama. Karama was founded in 1993. For some people in our audience, 1993 is like ancient history. You're like, what are you talking about? It was after the first World Trade Center bombing when 3 women were at a coffee shop and they were from 3 different areas that had large Muslim populations and they were all Muslims and they were really appalled at how Islam was being treated in the media. And imagine they were appalled in 1993. They had no idea what was to come years later. But they felt the need to start an organization and they founded Karama. And the word Karama means dignity. And what was really their founding creed is dignity for all, not based on whether or not you're a male or a female. It's dignity for all. And that's why it was so important that it wasn't just Muslim lawyers, it was Muslim women lawyers. It was important that women took their place and really became leaders in Islam because so many people think that Islam is like, oh, Islam is so horrible for women. And they were really adamant. They were like, it's not Islam. It's the people who are practicing. One of the founders, Dr. Aziza Al-Habri, says it all the time because I see her lectures all the time when we travel together. And she says something that's very powerful. She says, culture divides us, but the Quran, the Muslim holy book, unites us. And that's what she constantly tells when she goes and she speaks to Muslim organizations and Muslim groups, because so often we focus on the differences that the culture brings in instead of focusing on what the Quran gives us. And that's something that's so profound for Muslims because so often we're like, oh, let's argue about this and how you pray and how you cover all these little things. And it's just like, no, we're one community. And so what my gender has really shown me is that I really need to be involved because I really feel, and this is something that that's what really attracted me to Karama, is that we really feel that if Muslim women took their place as leaders, they don't have to be always out front, but leaders in their community and really talk about the essence of Islam, that people would better understand what Muslims were all about. Too often we let other people be the talking heads for us. We let men go out front and say, oh, we love Muslim women. And, but Muslim women, I'm going to tell you what they think. Muslim women need to talk for ourselves. And we need to be proud of who we are as Muslims. When people ask, they were like, oh, are you a Muslim? Yes, I'm proud to be a Muslim woman. I'm proud to be a Muslim woman lawyer. So it's important that Muslim women take their positions, take their really what their God-given right is, to have dignity, to take back the dignity that has been stripped away from them from so many outside forces, telling people that, oh my goodness, you're a Muslim woman, let me come help you. I don't need your help. I can take care of myself. I can move forward and say, as a Muslim woman, I know what my rights and responsibilities are. And so that's really what the religion has done for me. It has built up over years of being the child of an imam. And I know people in the audience who have heard the saying, the worst kids are the children of preachers and teachers. Well, that joke comes in the Muslim community as well. And they always say the worst kids are the children of imams and teachers. And my father is an imam and a teacher, and my mother's a teacher. So they were like, oh, here comes the troublemaker. But I always tell people, I'm not making trouble. I'm just being honest about what our religion says about gender equity, gender equality, what role women have in Islam. And it was something that was from the very beginning taught to me. My father was not one to be like, oh, my daughters can't go to college. Oh, my daughters can't be lawyers. He is by far my biggest cheerleader. I tell people all the time, I was like, Karama does not have a social media person right now. And I'm like, oh, I don't need a social media person. And people say, why not? I'm like, oh, if you go to our Facebook page, the biggest like is for my dad, and he shares it with all of his friends. So, I have a free social media person because he has always been our biggest advocate, because he's the one who will tell people all the time. The reason why the Muslim community has not been strong, has had all these issues, is that we have really had one arm tied behind our back by trying to keep our women back and from not supporting women. And he has really been an advocate from the time I was young to me and my younger sisters say, women can do it. Women, as Muslim women, you can do it. You can do anything you put your mind to. And so I think that's what we need to share with young girls of all faiths, is that you can really get it done. And don't let anyone say, well, because you're a girl, because you're a woman, and because you believe in this religion, I'm going to tell you that this is your place. And women have to take back and say, no, I'm going to tell you what my place is. And my religion is not something that's holding me back. That's just making me a more well-rounded person. But don't tell me what my religion says. Let me be educated on what my religion says so that I can really respond adequately when people say, oh, your religion says this about women. No, it does not. You're taking that out of context. You're taking something that is really cultural and just trying to tell people like, oh, that's what Muslim women do. Don't tell me what Muslim women do. Observe Muslim women, actually talk to a Muslim woman, and then come back to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahma. That was wonderful, informative, and it'll be a great conversation, I have a feeling, during the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, our next panelist, Janelle Johnson. Janelle served as a commissioner to the HRC from 2014 to 2019, including serving as vice chair for 2 years. So I know that the HRC is particularly delighted to welcome her back this evening. Reverend Johnson was ordained in 2012 and is a servant leader on the ministerial staff at Reed Temple AME Church in Glendale, Maryland, where she is the director of their newly launched domestic violence ministry. In 2017, she published her book, Is He Spiritual? You Deserve Only God's Best, which deals with her encounter with domestic violence. She has served as a corporate diversity manager and currently is appointed to a cabinet-level federal agency where she leads the agency's workforce and organizational effectiveness strategies. Reverend Johnson earned a certificate in theology and ministry and is currently pursuing a graduate degree in law from the George Washington University Law School. Reverend Johnson, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I just want to say to my beautiful sister who just spoke, I'm also a PK. And it was also said of me too, PKs are the worst ones. But that isn't true. It's just that anything that we do is magnified 10 times. So I just wanted to share that with you. Again, thank you very much to the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. I hold the commission very dear in my heart. They have a special place in terms of the work that they do to serve the constituents of Prince George's County, Maryland. So I'm happy to be here with you. And now more than ever, we need faith, we need unity, we need encouragement. So tonight, I just want to thank again the Commission for having this wonderful discussion about faith and gender and community. So I see my faith as the engine for empowerment for women. As a woman of faith and as clergy, I see my faith as that engine that pushes me. My Christian faith is the engine that empowers me as a woman to serve, to empower me to overcome challenges in my life, and it empowers me to fulfill my purpose. And really, I believe that the root of Christianity, I see the rudiments of the faith are really about service, about love, about reconciliation. And often people see service as the weaker position, but I believe that service is what makes you powerful. You know, people often see service in the feminine expression or from a feminine perspective, but I really see service as powerful, and I see femininity and being a woman as powerful. We're really in the Christian faith. We believe in Jesus. We believe that he is the Savior. And when you really think about the story of the Gospels and about Jesus, what he really came to do is he came to serve. And if we're going to be like him in the Christian faith, it's important that we be like him and that we serve others and have a heart of service. And when you really look at the story of Jesus, and you look at the Gospels, really what he did was when he touched the heart of people and you saw their lives change in the stories in the Bible, when you saw their lives change for the better, it was because Jesus served them. And so it's about the ability as a woman to walk in that power and to impact someone's life so that they not only see themselves better, but they too know that they are empowered and that they are powerful. And that's the role I see with women, particularly in the Gospels, in the Christian faith. So that is what the gospel is really about. It's about one person who's got some really good news, some great news, and that person sharing that really good news with other people so that they can benefit from this great news. And sometimes service, as I think about the Christian faith, service is not necessarily just limited to food and shelter and water, but sometimes service is the ministry of your presence. It's being with people in their time of need. So I want to talk a little bit about challenges. I'll be completely transparent with you because I believe that this is a safe space. That as a female preacher, when I came into the ministry, I struggled. And I struggled with whether or not I had to abandon my femininity. And I know that the word femininity, as we think about it, it's relative. It can mean something different to different people. But I did not want to act like a stereotypical male, right? I wanted to maintain who I am and what I was created to do. I didn't want to act like a guy. I wanted to act like, a woman. I wanted to maintain my femininity. But as I began to pray and meditate and center myself, it dawned on me as I prayed, and I really began to think about the ministry. I realized that I'm uniquely designed, and women are uniquely designed and created and purposed to do something great here on earth. And we don't have to abandon our femininity. We don't have to abandon our womanhood to be powerful and effective. But if we embrace it and walk in our purpose, we can affect change in our communities and in our society. That means, I just want to reiterate this point, that means that everything that is about you as a woman, about me as a woman, is aligned and designed for my purpose, aligned and designed for your purpose. And so, yes, I'll be honest with you. We are still breaking barriers in terms of women becoming pastors and leaders of churches. Even though, which is particularly perplexing to me, is as I look at the scriptures, I look at the New Testament, there are many examples of women leaders in the Bible, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, who had great influence in terms of spreading Christianity and sharing what we would call in the Christian faith, good news. As I was thinking about tonight, I thought about in the book of Romans, in the New Testament scripture, the Apostle Paul talks about a woman named Phoebe who was a teacher. And then there's this awesome couple named Priscilla and Aquila, and she's mentioned in the New Testament 4 times. And what's so awesome about her is that some theologians have suggested that Priscilla was greatly known. She was more prominent than her husband Some theologians have said that that just meant that she had a higher social status. But the point is that she was more well known than her husband. So that's why I often say that I believe that Christianity, in terms of empowerment, Christianity can empower women to really see themselves as leaders and as victorious no matter what they're facing. So the role of women is changing, it's expanding. And I believe that women are really beginning to take their place. And how women are viewed in the community is even changing. Women are taking more leadership roles, which I'm extraordinarily happy to see. And I'm happy to say in my own denomination, we're seeing more and more women. I'm a part of the AME denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal denomination, and we're seeing more and more women pastors. I admit that there's still more room to grow, but we're breaking barriers, and I'm beginning to see more female pastors, more women take leadership roles in the denomination. But here's the blessed hope. It's this wonderful journey that we're all on. This wonderful journey to see the role of women continue to expand. And the blessed hope is that the more we walk together and the more across faiths, the more we walk together and encourage one another, the more the role of women will continue to expand. So this notion of the fact that I can be feminine, however that's defined for you, I can be feminine, I can be female, and I can be powerful, and I can also be credible, and I can also be a leader in my congregation. That's incredibly encouraging for me. So it's this notion that women can bring their faith, they can bring their gender to the table, they can love God, they can love and serve people, and they can be powerful, and they can do it and be effective. I want to talk a little bit about how faith impacts community, just for a few moments. I believe that faith impacts how I view the community and how I serve, because it underscores the importance of, allowing people to be human and human experiences. I believe that's what faith is really about. And though we are a beautiful community of diverse cultures, races, ethnicities, and theological experiences and perspectives, the common thread with all of us is this continual search for the meaning and sense in our life experiences, and the ability to reconcile that search theologically. That's what faith is. And I'll give you an example. You've heard and as my bio was read by my beautiful sister, I experienced domestic violence. And so I always say that it didn't happen to me, it happened for me so that I could serve others, empower others who have experienced domestic violence. I do a lot of advocacy work in my private life outside of my federal career. And I do a lot of advocacy work with victims of domestic violence. And one of the things that I talk about to prevent and eradicate domestic violence, eradicating domestic violence is not just about permeating the consciousness of the public through education and effective public policy. But it's the root of it. The root of it is really the strategic integration of faith-based communities, right? It's about integrating faith into domestic violence programs, because what we have found out as I've talked to judges, as I've talked to other advocates, what we have found is that victims will often tell their faith leader first when they've experienced intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so that's how we know that faith is important, it's critical, it's paramount to the human experience. So when you're talking about someone's faith, when you're talking about a woman's faith, you're talking about why she shows up in the world, right? It's the reason she gets up in the morning. It's the reason that she perseveres. It's because of faith. So if you're a part of a community and you're going to be productive, it begins with your faith. So it's why you show up. It's why you show up to serve. It's why you show up to have these beautiful conversations in these sacred spaces. And even if the community, and I feel strongly about this, even if the community may not be a Christian community, or it's not the same community, that same way that you worship, we must recognize as women that God cares about the safety and the productivity of every community, even if they believe differently than we believe. I really believe firmly what my sister said, the importance of unity. And so when people reconcile this theologically, really reconcile that God cares about every community, that's when we'll be more enlightened. That's when we'll serve. That's when we'll really affect change, and we'll be able to serve with a greater passion. Again, I'll say this again. it's really about faith. That's why this conversation is so beautiful. It's about faith. It's about why we show up in the world to do the civic work that we do, to eradicate discrimination, to eradicate human trafficking, and a passion of mine, eradicate domestic violence. So again, thank you to everyone, and God bless you.
Thanks so much, Janelle. All right, we'll move on to our final panelist this evening, Arlene Groener, with whom I have the pleasure of working with in the past in interreligious work, and who's a dear friend of mine. Arlene Pianco Groener has been a resident of Silver Spring, Maryland since 1975. She retired from the United States Department of Justice in 2016 after a 30-year career as a civil litigator, most recently defending the United States in complex banking and government contract cases. She also spent nearly a decade in private law practice, concentrating on energy regulating matters. Since her retirement, Ms. Groener has volunteered as a driver of the Kemp Mill Village and for Bikur Holim of Greater Washington, and has served on the Young Israel Shomrai Emunah board and is on the steering committee of the Daughters of Abraham Interfaith Book Group. She previously served on the boards of the Kemp Mill Synagogue and the George Washington University Hillel. Ms. Groener has 2 sons and a daughter, as well as 3 granddaughters. She is planning to move to Israel in December 2020 to fulfill a lifelong dream and join her daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter. Arlene, we are delighted that you found time to join us, given your imminent upcoming move. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really wanted to start by thanking you for inviting me to participate in this discussion about the intersection of faith, gender, and community. There was a clear message from the other speakers that equality is a part of all the faith traditions represented here tonight, and that the problems that women have faced in each of these traditions were really more due to social conditions rather than the theology. And I find that a very hopeful message because it opens the door to improvement. It would be much harder to change things if it was theological than if it was sociological. The coronavirus has given us all the opportunity to draw upon lessons of faith. I was supposed to go to Israel for a visit in March to visit my daughter and my granddaughter, and I had this very difficult dilemma of whether to fly on March 8th. And I ended up not going, even though I knew it would be a financial loss. And in retrospect, that turned out to be the right decision. But at the time I was making the decision, it was, we didn't know that much about the coronavirus. It was a very hard decision. Our book group, the Daughters of Abraham, the prior month had read a book called Holy Envy by Barbara Brown Taylor. And the author is an Episcopal minister who teaches about comparative religion at Piedmont College. And in that book, she describes how her own faith was enhanced by practices that she learned while studying other religions. And one of the Christian sisters in our book group mentioned during our discussion how impressed she was by Judaism's focus on tikkun olam, which is the duty that every Jew has to endeavor to make the world better. And another sister at that same discussion said that her envy was of Islam because of the commitment to prayer in Islam, where believers pray 5 times a day. At that point in time, prayer had been a very major part of my life. My mother had died in April 2019, and for the year after my mother's death, I had been attending services morning and evening every day. And it was, my first instinct was to pray for God to tell me the answer. Should I go or should I stay? And then I realized that there was a Christian tradition that really was more appropriate for my dilemma. And it was something that my Christian sisters called to pray on it. Because I didn't need God to give me the answer. I needed God to give me the power to find my own answer. And I found that having the sisterhood of the Daughters of Abraham was very, very helpful in enhancing my own faith. And this is how I deal with the issues that I face as an observant Jew and dealing with issues of gender. Judaism traditionally has held to very specific gender roles. Men lead the public arena and women run the house. And raising children is key, and a traditional family is praised. And so, for example, on Friday night, when the Sabbath begins, in the classic Jewish practice, the mother would light the candles and say a prayer, and the father would go to services. And then when the father came home from services, there'd be a family meal. One of my earliest memories as a young child was my mother telling me that if I and my brothers were well behaved, when my father came home from services with the Sabbath angels, the angels would say, "Oh, let it be this way next week." But if the children were misbehaving, the angel would say, "Well, let it be that way next week." And that was a very scary thought, and it kept me and my brothers in line. So we would gather around the table, and at the beginning, after my father said the blessing on the wine, we would sing a prayer to welcome the Sabbath, and it was called Shalom Aleichem, and it means peace to you, angels from heaven, come in peace, bless us with peace, and then go in peace. And then we would sing another song that comes from the Proverbs. It was called Eshet Chayil, Women of Valor. And I've asked Jeff to bring up the text of this while I speak. And it's in the Bible. Hold on, I can tell you I don't have the, hold on, let me tell you the exact place. It's Proverbs 31. Let me go back. It's Proverbs chapter 31. And this is a hymn that I'd like to discuss with you briefly tonight because it captures the dilemma of women in faith. Eshet Chayil, in Hebrew, the woman of valor, is a song of praise of the ultimate multitasker. I always think about the one-man band, the person with the drum on his back and the accordion in his hands and the harmonica in his mouth. The woman of valor is a merchant and a provider who cares lovingly for her family as well as the needy. She is wise and kind, loved by her husband and children, praised for being God-fearing. But these days, such gender stereotyping is not necessarily seen as praiseworthy. Don't we want the father to share in child rearing? Don't most families rely on both parents to provide for their children? And what about one-parent households or people without children? Can we continue to sing this hymn in our current reality? Which brings me to a sad story. One time we were hosting a young woman for Shabbat, and I asked her, did you frequently have guests at your own family table for Shabbat? And she said no. And I was surprised because I knew her parents very well. And I said, why didn't you have guests? And I knew her parents were very hospitable. They had been hospitable to me. And she said to me that she didn't like inviting friends because her family didn't sing Eshet Chayil, and it made her embarrassed. And that made me realize that sometimes people will throw out the baby with the bathwater. In fact, my oldest son reminded me that we also had not sung the hymn until he learned it in school and asked us to do so. And so this incident captured for me the challenge of the intersection between faith and feminism. We don't have to reject the hymn as we expand our view of gender roles. An option would be to treat the hymn as a metaphor. Scholars say that the custom of singing this hymn at the Sabbath table came from the Kabbalists in the 17th century. They viewed the Sabbath as a representation of the feminine aspect of God, the Shekhinah. So if you don't want to praise a superwoman, you can still sing this song on Friday night by focusing it on how the Sabbath reflects God's love of human beings and gives us a day of rest from our endeavors and achievements. Or else take the compliment, say, I am woman, hear me roar. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Arlene. Okay, now I think we're going to bring all the panelists back for a Q&A. We have some really good questions. So, all right, ladies, are y'all ready? Super. I'm going to start out with a specific question for Kieran, actually. So Kieran, you spoke of cultural influences of religious practices in your conversation, and what I wonder how in recent years, as U.S. culture has focused more on gender equity, the Me Too movement, how has that impacted your the conversations within your community specifically? And after you're done answering that question, if anyone else wants to comment on that, because we all are affected, I guess, and our communities are by the greater culture that we live in. So, Karen?
Sure, yeah. So the Me Too movement was obviously a historic movement. It was one where women from all different faiths and backgrounds and cultures stood up and shared their experience, which I think for so long people have hidden and have not felt comfortable coming forward or talking about or sharing, even though I think many of us know in sort of quiet corners there are pervasive issues around sexual harassment and sexual abuse throughout the world, certainly here in the Western world and Eastern world, and and I'm speaking about South Asia, but certainly in other countries as well. In South Asian culture, there's sexuality is often tied to sort of a reputation and sort of honor, if you will. So there's a tie to family honor, there's a tie to reputation in terms of people's, especially women's life prospects, if these things are discussed openly in the community. So I think as we've seen the rise of the Me Too movement and people being more outspoken here, certainly in the US, I think that is translated worldwide. And I can say specifically, since I'm here speaking about the Sikh faith, also with our community. That being said, I think there is still a long way to go. I think, we are immersed in cultural norms each and every day. And I said it in my presentation, in a patriarchal culture, which I think in many ways does not talk about or enforce healthy norms of sexuality and empower women to, to speak on things that happen to them, whether it's abuse, harassment, or even a positive sexual experience. So I think, again, I see the conversations starting to happen more now, and there's a willingness to have those spaces where we can have those conversations. But I think, in the Sikh community and across the board, I personally think there's still a long way to go.
I would like to answer that as well. I really think that for Muslims, unfortunately, we have really let our culture divide us over and over again. For Karama, we took women in our Law and Leadership Summer Program to my home masjid in Philadelphia. And since my father is the imam there, he had a whole setup for us. And one of the women came up to me and she said, "Do you think your father would speak to me?" And I'm like, well, why not? She said, "Well, I'm in my early 40s. I live in Pakistan. I've never been able to speak to any man. I'm not allowed to speak to any man." I'm like, "Oh, no. He'll chat your ear off. Let's go talk to him right now." But it was something that I took for granted, the idea that I had a space in the masjid. Well, most people will think about mosque. That's the word that you've heard. But a space in the masjid, that I had a voice in the masjid. I came from a community that had women on the board of the masjid. So for me, that was like, of course women are involved. And it wasn't until she was just blatantly like, she had tears in her eyes. And I was like, I call my father Abba. I'm like, "Abba, what did you do?" And he's like, "I just spoke to her." And she was just so overwhelmed because she had never been given the opportunity. And so with that example, I was like, you know what? This is something that I need to continue doing, because I need to realize that I've been blessed with seeing it, and so many other people have never been given this opportunity. And I think for the Muslim community, it has become a big issue of how involved women are in the masjid and the mosque, whether or not they're on the boards and leadership, what their space is. I mean, some women will tell you, "I never go to the masjid because I'm not welcome there. I don't feel I can go. If I do go, the space that's allotted to me is so inadequate that I don't want to be there because I feel uncomfortable." So I do think the Me Too movement has kind of flowed into the Muslim religious spaces, because it's really given us a time to talk and say, "Hey, people, what are we doing? Why are we not?" If half of our population doesn't feel welcome, that's not a good sign, because as we all know from our various faiths, the millennials are really now very much spiritual and not religious. And so giving them any excuse to not come back, I'm like, what are y'all doing? We're going to lose them completely. So I really think that as a community, Muslims have to try harder to make sure that people feel welcome in their spaces, and having women more involved in the leadership of the organizations.
Super. Thank you, Kieran and Rahma. All right, we'll move to another question from our audience. And it's a general question, so whoever wants to answer. How important is it for young men and boys to learn from women in faith-based leadership roles? Would like to answer that.
I can take a
Great, Arlene.
I think it's really important because there's a subtle message, especially if the boys are being taught that the most important subject is religion, and then the only people who are teaching them religion are men. There's a subtle message that that women aren't important. So it's very important for young men, particularly while they're forming their ideas, to have women teachers.
I want to add something to that the cultural aspect of it. As an African American, and I can only speak about being an African American because I've been African American all of my life, but in the African American community, it's an interesting dynamic, and I don't know how to express this in an eloquent way, so I'm just going to say it how I feel it. But I've talked to so many boys, men, that they first came into the Christian faith because of their mothers. It was their mother who introduced them to the rudiments of the faith and lived the rudiments of the faith in front of them. My father he's retired now, but he was a pastor, but it was my grandmother who really lived the faith and taught him the faith. And so it's an interesting dynamic because the person teaching the kids, more often than not, there's some anomalies in African American families, but more often than not, it's the mother that teaches the child the faith. Can you hear me okay? It's the mother that teaches the child the faith. But there's more male pastors than there are female pastors. And I've always sort of struggled with that. Maybe I just kind of need to reconcile that theologically. Maybe it's something that I need to kind of grow and understand, or maybe it's something that's supposed to be sort of nebulous. But I just find that interesting. I listened to Tyler Perry, the media mogul, and he always remembers that his mother was always happiest when she was in church. And it was his mother that taught him about faith. So I just find that really interesting that depending on the culture, it really depends on the culture who teaches the child the faith. I don't know. Just thought that was really interesting.
Okay. Move on to the next question from the community. Are there biases people have about you or challenges you face because of your faith? And I think some of you spoke about this already. If you'd like to elaborate.
Well, I can go ahead. I mean, so many people, people come with this preconceived notion of what a Muslim woman should look like, where she should be from, how she should act. And I'm not always the caricature that they are expecting. And so I usually tell people, and they're like, oh, you're a Muslim? Are you a real Muslim? What kind of Muslim are you? And my response is always, I don't judge other Muslims because, that whole saying, I don't live in a glass house, so I'm not going to judge anybody else on how they are a Muslim. If they say Assalamu alaikum to me, I respond. Because I was raised that if someone gives me the blessing of saying Assalamu alaikum, I better say wa alaikum assalam so I can get the blessing as well. So if it's a random person on the street who just sees me as a Muslim and says that, I respond. I don't go, oh, well, are they a Muslim? Can I speak to them? Do they see me as a Muslim? And I constantly tell people that we should stop judging people just based on what we think a Muslim should look like. And I'm sure some of the other panelists can speak to it. It's like we're so busy judging each other on our faith instead of being strong in our faith. Like, to me, that is a disease that we have within ourselves. It's a disease that we have that we feel that we should judge other people's faith in order to make ourselves feel better. And so when people question me in the face, I'm like, yeah, I'm a Muslim. I'm proud to be a Muslim woman. I'm proud to be an African-American Muslim woman. I don't want to be from any other country, from any other culture. This is who I am. And I'm proud of that. And I wish other people would be proud of who they are and celebrate that instead of constantly being like, I'm not sure she's Muslim enough. Because if I have another person say, oh, you're African-American, do I need to teach you how to pray? Excuse me? No, you don't have to teach me how to be a Muslim. You don't. Or, I have some brothers and sisters from other faiths who are like, if I can just tell you about my faith, you'll convert over and you'll understand. I'm like, just how you were raised in your faith, I've been raised in mine. And by the way, I was a religion major, so I probably know more about your holy book than you do because I had to study it in order to graduate. So what you learned in Sunday school is probably not the same level that Duke required of their religion majors. I know the New Testament and the Old Testament way better than you probably do. I'm not just regurgitating it during services or, so I tell people just be who you are and respect others for the faith they have. I mean, some of my best friends are people who are super religious, but what we really love about each other is the fact that we have faith and we have connection. Because right now, as Arlene was talking, like during COVID, that's what has kept me going is my faith. My faith has centered me and made me feel like, okay, we can overcome this. This is not going to take over. And I feel it's my faith. And so when I call my friends, I'm like, how are you doing? How are your church services coming online? Like, how did you celebrate Passover? All of those questions, it's because you see someone else has faith and you're trying to connect. And it's the human connection about faith that I feel is so important.
Thanks, Rahman. That's, yeah, wonderful. Could say so much more. I'm wondering if, Arlene, can you speak to this question? Because as a modern Orthodox woman, I think that you've dealt with quite a bit. From within.
I've struggled with it my whole life, and I'm reconciled to the fact that it'll always be a struggle. I felt a calling. I think that's the right word. When I was in college, and there was no opportunity for me to go into the ministry, and I ended up going to law school. And I had a very good career. I was a lawyer for 40 years. I don't regret it at all, and I think I did worthwhile work. But I have this nagging feeling that, like, this couldn't have been what God wanted. That even if I did good work as a lawyer, I could have done better work as a minister, a rabbi, and it just wasn't an option. Now, today it is an option, and I feel very hopeful from the fact that just even in the last 40 years, things have changed so much. Because, these are very ancient traditions, and you can't expect them to turn around quickly. The fact that in one lifetime they could turn is really a hopeful sign. And so it's incremental progress, but yeah, there's a certain sadness I feel, because I feel like I didn't have the opportunities I wished I had.
Thank you, Arlene. Okay, we have another question from the community. How important is it for members? This is a general question for any of you that would like to answer it. How important is it for members of different denominations of a larger faith coexist and learn from each other? So e.g. Roman Catholic, Orthodox, so maybe like intra-faith. How important is that? I believe that's what the question is asking. So,
well, let me just speak to the Jewish side. I think it's very important. I think each denomination has something unique to contribute, and that we all learn from each other. But I found my participation in Daughters of Abraham was even more valuable than just talking to other Jews. What I see is that people of faith have a lot more in common with each other than they have with secular people, and that it's much less important, how you pray than the fact that you pray.
And I would agree with that. I've had really wonderful experiences in interfaith spaces and learning about different perspectives on faith and religion. So I think it's an extremely important aspect.
I will say that I don't know if Kieran has experienced this as well, but because the Muslim population is not that large, the fact that we have different denominations, which we don't even call it sects, we don't really even have the opportunity to do that here in the US because we're all Muslim. So for instance, when the Muslim ban came out, I'm African American, but the Muslim ban still affected me because my Muslim brothers and sisters from other countries were affected. So I couldn't be like, well, you're a Shia, you're a Sunni, you're a Ahmadi, you're from the nation, whatever all those differences were. For me, you were a Muslim and something was affecting you. And so, but that could be a response to the fact that we are not a large population, so that when there's not a lot of you, you stick together. I reference it similar to when you see groups of African-American students at predominantly white universities. You might not get along with all of them, but since you're so small, you know everybody in that group, and you know that you can depend on everybody in that group because it's so small. So I really think that we don't have some of the problems that larger religions here in the US have, because we don't have the ability to be picky about who we are saying, oh, well, you're not the type of Muslim I want. We don't have that flexibility right now. We're not large enough for that.
And I would just add to that, I think it's important. I mean, you mentioned the Muslim ban. That is something like I know as SALDEF as an organization stood up against as well. And there's many, policies or social situations that that faith informs, right? So I think it's important as members of faith communities, when we look at our key values and principles, to also show up for other communities in action. And, I mean, it's, a lot of times we break up into, communities, or we talk about, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, the list goes on. But if you look at the core values of each of our religions, I think, for the most part, they're universal, right? And they extend beyond that particular group or even particular individuals who practice it. So I think that's also another important aspect of faith.
And I will say, as Kieran will tell you, that after 9/11, the first person who was killed was someone that they thought was a Muslim, but he was actually Sikh. And so they have been an ally from the very beginning, because they were also really targeted because people did not know enough about who Sikhs were, that they were like, oh, he's wearing a turban, so he must be a Muslim. Let's kill him. And they thought they were killing a Muslim, and they were actually killing a Sikh. So they have really, since 9/11, been the victims of so much discrimination. And you're just like, oh, it wasn't really Muslim discrimination. Well, they were being discriminated against because people thought they were Muslim. And to me, that's still discrimination against Muslims when you are assuming someone's a Muslim and discriminating against them.
All right. Wonderful comments. I want to keep it going. It's a very good conversation. Thank you, guys. I see a question here, specifically, I believe for you, Kieran. It's how would someone who is outside the community learn about Sikhism? Is it welcoming to outsiders?
So Sikhism is very welcoming to outsiders. The founder of the Sikh faith, created spaces in gurdwaras where people from all different backgrounds and religions could come in, listen to the prayers, listen to the kirtan, which is our religious music. And one of the key concepts in Sikhism is langar, which is a shared meal. It's free. It's prepared all by volunteers at the Sikh temple or gurdwara. And that is served actually in India 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to anyone from any background who wants to come and share a meal. Everybody sits on the floor together, sort of symbolizing that everybody's at the same level. So Sikhism is welcoming. I think there was a second part of the question that I may have missed.
I thought there was a second part, but I read that, and yes, it's for something else. It was, I believe, a quote that was continued.
Okay.
So there's no second part. Yeah.
So absolutely, everybody would be welcome into a Gurdwara space, regardless of your background or your religion. And also just want to note too that within the Guru Granth Sahib itself, there are writings of spiritual teachers and I guess it would be prophets from other religions as well. So there, it is in that way. I guess you could use the word inclusive. I mean, that's probably not the best word, but it is certainly welcoming to people from different faiths.
Yeah, I know with my experience of the Unity Walk, for several years in Washington, D.C., that, we would always go in and get food from the Sikh Gurdwara and, participate in any sort of, ceremonial experience. And it was always very welcoming. Of course, we're now, not able to do that, physical social distancing. Which brings me to a question for each of you, and you don't all have to answer this question, but if you would like, how have you been able to navigate since March, essentially? How have you been able to navigate your spiritual space, your religious community? How has that impacted you personally? And as a woman, in terms of access to your own personal spiritual journey and fulfillment, how has this whole situation impacted that, if that makes sense?
Well, I can speak to that. I had an interesting experience in Orthodox Jewish life. You need 10 men to make a quorum for a service. And normally, in a community synagogue that would have like 300 people, it's not relevant. When COVID closed down all the synagogues, the rules in Montgomery County, where I live, were allowing only 10 people back when they reopened. And in my synagogue, they had this rule that if there could only be 10, there had to be 10 men. And I found that very objectionable. But I understood it because it wouldn't be a complete service, because when I was saying the memorial prayer for my mother, and also for my father, if there were 9 men and me, we couldn't start the service. And I wanted the 10th man to come as much as the guys did. So I knew it wasn't prejudicial. But anyway, our synagogue and some of the other synagogues went to the county and got permission to open with 12. So there were like 2 or 3 seats, whatever they had, for women. So I then signed up. You had to sign up, because they were monitoring the participation because of COVID. So anyway, I signed up and I went sometimes, and there'd be like 3 seats designated for women, and I'd be the only woman there. And I contacted the synagogue and I said, you got to tell women that you've opened up for women. And they said, no, we've told women that they've opened up, but they're not coming. And I found this very, very shocking. And even like on the high holidays, there were empty seats. Now we're opened up more. There are like 6 seats for women. And there were empty seats. I couldn't believe it, even on the most important day of the year. And I think that women have internalized the exclusion. And so even when women have a place, they don't take it.
Wow.
It's interesting.
Any others? Comments? Women have been most impacted during this time. I mean, this is aside from faith, but by work, right? Women have left the workforce. Over half, I believe, more than half of women have left than men. And so, when women aren't a part of the conversation, aren't a part of the community, and I'm guessing that kind of, right, seeps into the religious space, the spiritual space. Does anyone else want to comment?
I actually have enjoyed this time period of being at home. For us, for Ramadan was, our holy month came, almost right after COVID started. And my niece, who is 7 now, said, this has been the best Ramadan ever. Mm-hmm. And we were so happy because we were working really hard to make sure that this is more like, because she used to be like, oh, we go to parties every night, because part of Ramadan was that communal meal when you broke the fast and you'd go to different people's houses or you would go to the masjid to break. And so we were trying to make sure that she was still excited about Ramadan, because we were like, we can't lose her so young. But she said, this has been the best Ramadan ever because we're always together and we pray together and we eat together. And I know what you guys are doing and I've learned so much. And so it has really been a time to really connect back to the essence of what, to me, Ramadan was all about. I think that too many of us had gotten really wrapped up into who could have the bigger, we call it iftar, which is the break fast, who could have more people, who could have more food, who could have the best menu, so it had become more kind of trivialized and not really focused on the faith. And so I really think that COVID has given us an opportunity to really refocus. And I love the fact that I could watch an imam, I could watch a female religious scholar from all over the world from my home. And I'm like, oh, who am I going to watch today? Who am I going to listen to? I wasn't limited to whoever was in the DMV or how far I wanted to drive. So it has been to me a blessing because I have been able to experience so much more than I would have in the past, because I would not have listened to lectures daily. If it was me fasting and I was going in and out of work, I was just trying to get home from work with that big headache and making sure we have something to break fast. I wasn't the hour before we break fast, oh, let me listen to this lecture from the scholar, or, let me read the Quran and make sure I get up with my readings. I really felt like I refocused this year because COVID really forced me to refocus. And that's why, in a way, I feel like it's a blessing, because it's really caused a lot of us to kind of refocus on our faith.
Thank you, Rahma. I see there's a question here about in regards to sacred text, and I know that Rahma is, spoke about it. Also, Janelle, I think you did. Also, religious text, and Arlene shared as well. But we'll pose the question, and y'all can see if you want to go at it. So the question is from an audience member: I have not heard the panelists speak plainly to the fact that the sacred text is often used in ways that does not empower women, but rather supports them staying in unhealthy relationships. Yeah? Who would like to speak with that? Janelle?
Yes, I'll answer that one. All over that one. First, I want to honor the person who asked the question, because it's relevant and it's real, right? So I will say this as a person who has experienced sexual violence. And I only experienced it one time, but it was one time too many. And I had a great support system around me. And the reason I had a great support system around me is because I had people of the faith who did not encourage me to stay in an unhealthy and violent relationship. And the reason I honor the person who asked the question is because it is true. I cannot speak intelligently about the other faiths represented here tonight, but I can say in the Christian faith, I know ministers who have told, and I'll make a sweeping generalization that the person that asked the question is female. I have told women to remain in unhealthy relationships. I would even say violent relationships, because God hates divorce. And what completely takes scripture out of context to have women remain in a relationship that God never intended for them to be in. And the reason I say that is because telling someone to remain in something that is unhealthy is antithetical to the scripture. So I would say, and I'm going to say this because I'm feeling real bold tonight, that perhaps the person that encouraged the woman to remain in the relationship doesn't really know scripture. Because scripture, from a Christian perspective, there's a scripture that says that Jesus came that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Well, if someone is treating you in a way that's physically unhealthy, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, that's antithetical to the scripture. I can go on and on, but I want to be sensitive to time. So I will say this from a legal perspective to support the person who asked the question. I'm a legal law program right now, and I happen to be at an event that was sponsored by the governor. And I met several judges. And sort of in private conversation, the judges sort of said that, we can, issue these protective orders, but what really needs to happen is a conversation needs to happen with the faith leaders, because we have faith leaders that are encouraging women to remain in violent relationships. So I answered the question to say it's antithetical to the scriptures to have someone remain in something that is unhealthy or that would cause you to be sick. And I'll stop right there. I can give you scriptural reference to back up what I'm saying. I will slow my roll, as we say in the African American community. That just gets me riled up, because to tell someone to remain in something unhealthy is just antithetical. We can take this offline.
Absolutely, Janelle. Thank you so much. Yeah. Anyone else would like to? Rahma?
Yeah, I would actually like to speak on that, because Karama as an organization did a lecture series called Debunking the Myth, because people had come to us with a few what I consider domestic violence issues, and was really kind of saying, hey, isn't this Islam? Isn't this what Muslims are supposed to do? So we wrote 2 papers, one on female genital mutilation and one on what's called the Angels Cursing Hadith. And for those non-Muslims, Hadiths are sayings and things that Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, said. And the Hadith that had been told to women was that if you do not acquiesce when your husband wants to have sex with you, the angels will curse you all night because you said no to your husband. And so women were coming to us saying, are you serious? Like, I'm going to be cursed by angels? And, for those people who don't know, Muslims believe in angels too. People are always surprised. It is not just a Christian thing. Muslims believe in angels as well. And they came to us saying, we have imams telling us this. We learn about this in our marriage counseling. Like, you can never say no to your husband. And so we were like, we'll do research on this. And so, because we're always big on, we're not a feminist organization. We are a Muslim women's organization, and we go back to the Quran. And so we went back to the Quran and went to the actual sections that people were using as reference. And we were like, that's just not true. There's supposed to be mutual pleasure between spouses. And if a woman doesn't want to have sex, that's not mutual pleasure. And so we did that paper, and we spent months researching it, because the Quran has been used, Hadith has been used by Muslim men to continue patriarchy. Patriarchy is real in all of our faiths. I mean, Kieran mentioned at the beginning, patriarchy has been used as the kind of, well, since a man said it, it must be right. As we all know, that's never the case. And if a man told me this is what my sacred text says, it must be right. We're constantly telling women, it's just like, I need you to go to the Quran yourself and read it yourself. And if you can't read, ask a sister to help you. And please, we always would love people to read it in its natural language, it's the original language of Arabic. But even if you read it in English, to really talk to women scholars, because so many times, even the translations are through a patriarchal lens of really trying to really keep women in a place where they don't need to be. And when they go to the actual language, it's not actually in there. It's not in the actual Arabic language that people are like, oh, this is what your Quran says. It's like, did you read that in Arabic? Or did you read a translation from somebody in the early 20th century who decided that's what it means and kind of gave their own translation on top of what was there? So I think that constantly, yes, I will agree that sacred texts are often used. And right now during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it is imperative that more religious leaders take some kind of basic training about domestic violence, realize that they should be the first responders. They should be reporting it to the police. They should be getting people involved. They should have the National Domestic Violence Hotline number available to give out to parishioners, to people who are coming in, because this is a real deadly thing for women. Between a certain, I think it's 18 to 40, the most, especially if you're pregnant. I mean, I was mind blown when it was like, if you were pregnant between 18 and 40, you are more likely to be killed by a partner than anybody else. And we acknowledge that, and that happens across faiths. And we need religious leaders to stand up and say, this is not acceptable for anyone, and especially not women who need to be protected, especially, to me, pregnant women at the time when we should really be welcoming them and caring for them. The fact that so many of them go through abuse at that time. So really telling our religious leaders, when an imam calls me and says, I don't know what to say, I said, the only thing you say is, here's the number to the hotline. I feel like that's a win. I was like, stop making like, oh, well, what did he do? How did you feel? I mean, if he didn't hit you, no. If she comes to you and says, I feel like I'm being abused, take her as her word that she's being abused and give her the names to the hotline. Give the name of some local shelter that can help. But really turn it over to the professionals, because too often as religious leaders, they're not professionals and don't know how to handle domestic violence.
Thank you, Rahma. Yeah. Very powerful words. Thank you. I see that we have about 5 minutes left this evening, and I see that I had maybe overlooked a question that came, and it's for Janelle. Janelle, this question is for you, but I actually think we can. I'm gonna tag a question so the whole group can answer it. So Janelle, if you go first, and then I'll ask the question to the whole group as well. So Janelle, what advice would you give to a young woman of the Christian faith wanting to enter into the ministry, but belongs to a denomination that does not believe in ordaining women? And then, if I can I'll just tag on really quickly. For the rest of you, just, kind of what advice would you give young women within your faith who are seeking leadership roles, whether it's being ordained as a religious, leader, prayer leader, whatever that may mean? What advice would you give to her? So, Janelle.
Okay, I'll make it first thing I would say, as much as you can, be at peace. Be at peace with that organization, denomination. Start with peace first. The second thing I would say is prayer, and be spirit-led. And I believe that God will lead you in terms of where you need to be. You don't have to be contentious or fight against the grain, because your gift will always make room for you. And it'll bring you before great men and great women. That's what the scripture says. And so I don't believe in being anywhere where I'm tolerated. I believe in being in places and spaces where I'm celebrated, right? And then the last thing I would say, I would just sort of leave you with this analogy. This is not scriptural, it's sort of a Janelleism. The last thing I would say is that whenever it's time for the eaglet to soar, the eagle will make the nest prickly. So sometimes when God creates a situation where you're not going to be able to soar the way he intends for you to soar, he'll make that space a little uncomfortable so that you can go and fulfill your purpose.
Like that. Others? Rahma?
I would just say that because there's no ministry per se in the Muslim faith, that people become imams just to lead prayer, that some of the biggest scholars in Islam are Muslim women. Some of the different schools of thought that are named after men, their teachers were women. So there is so much space that as a child of an imam, I would always tell people it's not a glamorous job. You don't want that anyway. You'd rather be a scholar of the religion, because those are the people who are honored to me in Islam. Is that the imam is just someone who leads prayer, who might give the khutbah, which are the sermon on Friday during our services. But the scholars are the people that people go to when they want religious decisions being made. And there are so many sheikhs who are men, or sheikhas that are women, that have so much knowledge to share, that I would not limit myself because I can't be an imam and lead prayer. Like, to me, that's just the basic thing that I don't want to worry about. I want to be a scholar of the faith so I can share with others. And there is nothing that stops a woman from being a scholar of Islam, from being a scholar who teaches men and women. There's nothing limiting. So that when people are like, well, Muslim women can't be imams, I'm like, and why would you limit yourself to being an imam? Like, why would that be the highest you're aiming for when you could be a scholar of the religion? And so when people come to me and say, you can't be an imam, I'm like, I don't want to be. But I would always tell the young girls that I work with, I'm like, I want you to, become a scholar of the Quran, to memorize the Quran. I mean, I have a niece now who memorized the Quran at age 12. And I'm so proud of her. And I'm not saying, too bad you can't be an imam. I'm saying, you know what? You can get a PhD in Islamic studies. You can go and study all over the world about Islam. You can be this great scholar because you know the Quran now. And that's what we should be teaching our girls, is that they can learn all they want to about the religion and not be limited by some title that people give to make them feel better.
Thank you.
I completely agree with what you said, that the focus on the title is misplaced, but I think also the focus on the denomination may be misplaced. What you have to do is follow your heart and follow your spirit.
Beautifully said. Kieran?
So like Rahma said, it also in Sikhism, there isn't a formal ministry where you go to sort of become a religious leader. You're just more learned in Sikhi, and you are able to do prayers and conduct services, etc. I would love to see more women in that role, leading services. Our faith absolutely allows for women to be in that role and do, conduct the same services as men. So to any woman or Sikh woman that would like to go down that path or is thinking about going down that path, to you, I say, we support you. I commend you. I support you. And there's probably a million other Sikh women whose support you have. So I would love to see more Sikh women in religious leadership positions throughout the country.
Okay, I think that about does it. Ladies, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation, and we could keep going, I'm sure all of us. So thank you so much for your time tonight and your words of wisdom and all that you shared. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I amplify Jenna's remarks. We want to thank, first of all, the panelists for, again, the wisdom, the thought-provoking answers, the presentations, the uplifting, and showing how we have much more in common than we do differences. And so we thank you for the time that you dedicated to us tonight. We want to thank our moderator, Jenna, for her thoughtful questions and leading this conversation in such a way that we all, I think, took several nuggets to share. So we are women, hear us roar. There we go, my reference to Helen Reddy. So thank you. I also want to thank our amazing partner, the Prince George's County Memorial Library, Nick Brown, the CEO, who was running the technical portion of this behind the scenes. So we thank him. We cherish that partnership. I'd also like to thank from the Human Relations Commission, both Fatima Mahmood and Kyla Hannington for putting this event together and for also running interference behind the scene tonight. So thank you, thank you. Before I move on to my final, I just want to say that like Rahma and Janelle, I too am as Janelle said, PK, a preacher's kid, a minister's kid, an imam's kid. So yeah. Very important. I want to remind everybody that if they have not already taken the census, please take the census. The deadline we thought was the 31st. New ruling came out. It is now tomorrow. So please, if you haven't, please do it. If you know others that haven't, please tell them. This matters. This matters for 10 years. It affects the funding that we get in the county. It affects healthcare that we get. It affects education. It affects who we send or how many representatives we send to the Capitol for representation. So it matters. If you have friends, relatives, or folks that you know that are maybe here as part of an immigrant population, or perhaps they're undocumented, please tell them to take the census as well. The census is not looking for that type of thing, and it is so important to be counted. So please do that. And last but not least, please check out the library's events page. There are lots more exciting events coming up, and I'm sure they're going to put it on the screen, but I'm also going to give it. It's pgcmls.info/virtual-events. There we go. And I also want to give the census. It's my2020census.gov. I'm hoping someone will put that up there as well. My2020census.gov. Please, please, please. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for standing by. We ran a little over, but this was really wonderful. I hope this is the first in many conversations that we'll have on this series. So thank you all, and please have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.